Metro Supply Chain is the official sponsor of the Ask the Experts Theater at Edge 23, pioneering the future of supply chain with investments in advanced automation, robotics, and business intelligence. Metro Supply Chain delivers innovative, real world supply chain solutions that advance business. Learn more at metroscg.com.
Good afternoon. Welcome to the Ask the Expert Theater presented by Metro Supply Chain. My name is Sarah. Metro Supply Chain is the largest logistics provider in Canada. They are privately owned. We have about 100 locations, including UK, the US, and of course, Canada. I am the Senior Business Development Manager for the United States operation. It is my pleasure to introduce Martin Rowan with Reveal.
Oh, thank you, Sarah. I appreciate it. Thanks, guys. I know this is a little bit of the graveyard shift, especially after lunch, dessert. Fortunately, no alcohol's involved yet, so we're still good. So what we want to do is slightly different than what's been happening here at the theater for most of today, where we've just been doing Q&A panels. I want to give you a little bit of a level set around some of the information around supply chains and how do you optimize your software to get the most out of what you have in a supply chain, how to measure it, etc. And then we will have it open up for Q&A if that works for everybody. Okay, so one of the things I just want to level set, obviously, is that supply chains, and I want to define supply chains very carefully here, because when you talk to some people, supply chains is shipping, for others it's logistics, for some it's manufacturing and operations, for some it's kind of the order fulfillment, the delivery side. When I'm going to talk supply chain, I'm going to let you talk end to end, so from customer all the way to supplier. And what's interesting is that end-to-end view of supply chains were never considered strategic at all. Those statistics out there were pre-pandemic statistics about how CEOs expected and what they thought of their supply chains. Post-pandemic, everybody now knows what a supply chain is, even grandma, right? And have you guys ever struggled to tell your kids what you did for a living? Now suddenly everybody knows, right? I'm not going to get my iPhone in time. Okay, that's a supply chain issue, right? So it's been an interesting journey, and I think the thing that I want to call out, though, is that for the most part, the disruptions haven't changed much, but the business has adjusted pretty significantly. For instance, if you look at some of the emerging new business models, we don't just sell equipment that produces compressed air, we now rent compressed air, right? So this company, as an example, in Germany, decided to start going into a SaaS model. You think of circular economies when we're trying to look at how we actually reintroduce some of the material that we waste over time. But at the end of the day, that inconsistent trade uncertainty that exists all the time has been there, right, for a long, long time. But I think most importantly, the title of Chief Supply Chain Officer is actually becoming more and more prevalent, and you're seeing that person sitting at the CEO table now. And that's been a big change since all of that's been going on. So the world expects the supply chain people to be this, right? We're supposed to be the beacon, the stability in the storm. We're the guys that are supposed to hold it all together. However, I think we feel more like this typically, trying to weather the storm, right? And it always feels like our hair's on fire, no matter where you are in that end-to-end supply chain. So, like I mentioned earlier, one of the things that's really important to understand is that this disruption concept hasn't really gone away. It's been there for a long time. And these are some basic statistics from over the years. I mean, things like back when copper mines weren't producing enough copper had supply chain disruptions. Obviously, we didn't even think of the war at Ukraine, but back in the day, there were plenty of other things like the explosions and earthquakes in Japan, right? These things have always been around. The reality is that actually doesn't take away from the poor visibility, the uncertainty, the mistrust in the data that we deal with, just the bias and behaviors that continuously exist out there in the supply chain. And the challenge is, and we're going to talk a lot about this, the challenge is that technology doesn't really solve those problems. You know, even with all the talk of AI and all the talk of the technologies out there, you can make the smartest algorithm do the smartest things for you. But if human behavior is involved, and uncertainties behold, we are going to react in a very reactive way as opposed to a proactive way. I mean, a really perfect example is you can forecast 100% accurate, which is unheard of course. But if you can't execute to that, or the production teams are not listening to that, it's useless, right? And so we really do need to make sure that we're actually understanding the technological and the human concept, which then plays back into the notion that we have to work together as teams in the supply chain. And this is that end-to-end. We heard at the keynote talked about silos, right? These information silos, these team silos. If we're not able to integrate the processes end-to-end, then we're not going to be able to react to the disruptions in the supply chain, right? Okay. So one of the challenges with integrating processes is the fact that we don't have a single source of truth. Now, if any of you run any form of ERP or any major core system, you'll know that as soon as I'm in purchasing, I do my thing and I throw it over the fence. And then I just say it's out of my purview. It's now manufacturing's problem. And they just throw it over to sales and they got to sell it, right? And this whole concept of no single source of truth makes us feel like this. And spreadsheets become the norm. Is there any company or any process that you know of that does not run a spreadsheet? No, right? Everybody, and they got 3 in their back pocket just in case you take one of them away from them, right? It's like there's always a spreadsheet, right? So the way I like to think of it is this: like, if you think of a golfer, now you can replace that with any kind of sporting event if you want. But if you want to become a pro player, you can look towards a technology, right? The technology will get you that far. Your clubs can get better. You're able to get the latest and greatest things. There's a lot of forgiveness inside of them. But really what you're trying to do is figure out how do I can dress like a golfer. I can have the best clubs ever, but that's not going to make me a good golfer, right? It's like I can be in a sports car, but if I don't know how to do stick shift and I don't know how to drive a racing car, I'm just not going to get any faster, right? So technology gets us only to a point, and we're trying to get out of the hacker space as supply chain folks, right, and move into the pro space where we really are proactively driving towards efficiency. So this is a research report we did with companies that run SAP. Now, it doesn't really matter, frankly. I believe this fact will actually probably translate to almost any other ERP. But only 6% of companies actually felt that they were able to run their supply chains end-to-end effectively using their technology. That means 94% of them don't feel that way. Yeah. I'm seeing a few smiles. I'm not sure if this resonates with anybody. I see a few head nods too. Okay, good. So this is a real problem, right? And again, if we think of what I just positioned earlier, no technology is going to solve this. So I want you guys to ponder this as an example. If you think of your core system, your core ERP, whatever that technology is that you use at your center, imagine that an asset. Imagine that to be like a manufacturing asset. Now, if you think you're a manufacturer and you go spend $10 million on a piece of equipment and you run that thing at 15% utilization, what's going to happen? You're most likely going to get fired, right? It's just not going to happen. If you think of your core system, if you spend millions and millions of dollars on some form of an ERP and you're using 10 to 20% utilization, that's a sin, right? And frankly, based on some of that research we talked about, when we go in and look at clients and companies, we find that on average, people use less than 22% of the ERP's capabilities. Now, if you've just spent, like I said, millions of dollars on this thing, that's a significant underutilization of that asset, right? So one of the concepts I want to share with you guys as you go back to your organizations is this idea of return on asset. Now, it's a financial term. I don't want to get caught up in the actual logistics of that. And frankly, if you ask an accountant and the way they would do that on a balance sheet doesn't make sense to what I'm trying to talk about. But the point of return on assets, if you think of your ERP as the nervous system of your business, therefore an asset to you, then I want to be able to squeeze as much juice out of this thing as possible. I want to get this thing as efficient as possible. I want to be able to make sure that I can generate profitability off of this asset. And that's return on asset. That's purely what it is just being able to see what's the income that I'm producing from this asset. But that's a significant mind shift for most companies. Most companies see any of their technologies as just merely a tool to make my job easier, rather than seeing it as a company or corporate asset to adjust my supply chain. So I want to talk a bit about that in particular. So this question obviously is at the heart of it, right? How do I maximize my investment to be able to become an agile, effective supply chain? So the first thing we got to do is define what a good supply chain is versus a great supply chain. Any recommendations? Who can tell me what they think is a good supply chain? Yes, go ahead. End-to-end real-time visibility. I like that very much. Okay, what's a great one then? Faster end-to-end visibility? No, but you're on the right track, right? So good, in many ways, is this idea that I have resilience. So if you think of what the pandemic did, it bent us out of shape, and we keep talking about resilience. And all resilience means, by definition, is we come back to where we were. That's a good supply chain, right? A great supply chain can actually capitalize on that change. So they have the ability to proactively adjust to meet those goals that they're trying to put out there and really step up to. Now, you can't do that if you have an asset, a technological asset, we're using at 20% utilization, right? So we have to raise the capability in that space so we can actually become agile. So resilience is good, but agility is great, okay? So let's talk about a few things, just high level, that will kind of help you figure out where you stand in relation to the good to great as an organization, okay? The first one is this thing called a business maturity continuum. It's just a 5-level maturity continuum that basically says, how well am I using the technology I have to meet my business objectives? So if you're on level 5, you basically are capitalizing your investment as best you can, and you're meeting real business value things like service level increases, inventory turn improvements, operational cost reductions, throughput improvements, right? Real active business value. To do that, you need to have optimal processes, optimal systems, optimal data to be able to achieve that. That's that agility piece I talked about, right? However, if I have rules in my system that don't reflect reality, I can't optimize that. And if I have transactional integrity issues, I don't have transactional excellence, then I can't even update the rules to become optimized. And if I have a technology riddled with spreadsheets and I don't have a single source of truth and everybody's got their own world, I'm even further down. So if you think of it like building a house, foundation, walls, windows, doors, roof kind of thing, right? I can't do it if I don't even have the foundation in place from a stability point of view, right? And stabilization, and if you think of 1 through 3 are fundamental. If you can get through those 3, you can actually move into that agile, great supply chain. Because when you're there, you have that option to be set new goals, adjust, set new goals, adjust, and keep moving in this continuous improvement cycle. Make sense? Okay. Where do you think you guys are? Give me just throw out some numbers. 1, 2, 3, 1.5, 0. There is no 0, just in case you were wondering. 1. Do I have a 2? Do I have a 2? Yeah, we got a 2. Anybody got a 3? 3? Oh, you went from 1 to 3? Oh, you still at 1. Okay. Right, and that's the problem, right? Because we're stuck. We are literally stuck in this thing. So first point, be honest of where you are. Take a picture of this. Download this piece. It's actually on the website too. Frankly, if you want to go here, you can do a little self-assessment. And it'll actually show, you can run through 10 questions and it'll actually measure you and tell you where you are as an organization. So that's pretty helpful. Okay. Number 2. We can't just put lipstick on a peg, right? And so we have to get transactional excellence going. We got to get our house in order. We got to make sure we trust things. So give me an example. If I'm an end-to-end supply chain and I'm dependent on being able to meet my forecast demand, and MRP is running and trying to balance demand and supply for me, but I have a 2-year-old purchase order that says it's coming in, how accurate is MRP results going to be? If I'm running an IBP process or SNOP process and I'm looking at my demand, I'm trying to increase my demand forecast accuracy, but yet my supply is inaccurate or outdated or just not relevant, I'm not going to be able to do that. So we got to get a house in order, and it starts with just cleaning up data, making sure the transactions are actually relevant. We think of AI, we think of all these things, guys. AI is going to change the world. We know this, no question about it. But it is still the old adage of garbage in, garbage out, right? And so if we're taking a whole bunch of crappy data into whatever tool we are, no matter whether it's an algorithm or AI, it's going to give us recommendations that we're not going to trust, right? Okay. The third thing is to start thinking of this idea of getting rid of the spreadsheets, right? And I know that's like asking, to stop breathing, right? I get it. We actually, one of the companies we worked with, they had a spreadsheet that actually broke on them because it went too, they didn't have enough rows and columns left in Microsoft Excel. So and they called it the beast. And this poor person literally white-knuckled this thing. She would spend 4 hours every day after it ran to just fix it. That was kind of the thing. Now, again, if you read this little deal bit here, to give you a sense of the errors and potential risks with spreadsheets, right? There is no scalability. You're putting your entire business at risk. And so we need to come back into the systems and get the technological pieces in place. Get back into a single source of truth. Okay. One of my favorite things, I love this little comic here. It's like a political system, right? So, everybody wants to change, but nobody wants to change. Everybody wants to change, but doesn't want to change. Same thing with our businesses, same thing with our processes, same thing with our technology. Just make life easier for me, rather than should I be doing more to make the business more effective? And that sometimes is a really difficult conversation to have. But the reality is, if you think of these little Lego boxes here, when you implement the technology effectively, you can actually allow everybody to be flexible within their own world of rules, so that the house looks slightly different for each of the different processes then, but they're still living within the guardrails of what the technology and the best practices are within that. But this is a really key part. The human component, which we talked about earlier, is so challenging. And of course, to really help us take that human component and really raise the level of its capability, is we need to raise the level of the technological capability we talked about earlier. So that means, how do we apply some of the best practices that are built into some of these tools to be able to actually allow it to do all the automation for us? So one of the things that you find a lot of when we talk to people in supply chains is there's a bit of we all wear capes, right? There's a bit of a hero complex, right? Like we're solving problems all the time. And in reality is that we really want to get the system to do the mundane work. And our cape should be there to really solve the big problems, not the little things every single day that's happening. And to do that, you need to let the system do its work, and we then manage by exception, right? And getting the system to do that is important. However, it really hinges on this one single thing. And this is this big flipping the script thing, is we have to move away from thinking training is good enough, right? To train is a dog jump through hoop, right? Training is this little picture here when somebody looks over and like, oh, I should be putting the dogs in front of the sleigh, right? Education is all about knowing the why, the what, what's the implications of the upstream and the downstream of my actions. What are the strategic components? So there's a piece that goes beyond just my silo of what I need to know. It is actually understanding the end-to-end supply chain. Therefore, I'm able to actually impact and understand the impacts that I have across the board. Some of the statistics are pretty frightening to think about how quickly people lose knowledge, the knowledge leakage. And of course, because we're humans, we'll go back to what's easy, what we know, and we'll fall back into old behaviors, okay? Which is probably the single biggest reason why most large implementations of technology fail, is because we don't actually show people the new way, and they don't buy into it, and then they just go back to old ways. Yes, leadership commitment's a big one. Yes, the technology has to be successfully implemented. Yes, yes, yes. But those that are running it need to physically have to be bought into the change management of the process. Okay. So of course the old adage of insanity, right, is what's going to prevent us from doing this again? So if you're an SAP shop and you're trying to move to S/4HANA, or if you're an Oracle and you're trying to move to the cloud, or if whatever technology you're trying to move to, what's going to prevent us from actually doing that again? And fundamentally, I would say go back to those 6 things I mentioned. Measure yourself successfully. Look at the capabilities of the technology you're using, what level you're using it at, educate the people, make sure they really grasp it, and don't just depend on the technology to solve all your business problems. Okay? I want to share a couple stories with you, and then I'm going to ask Ed to come up and we can do a bit of a quick Q&A. Here's a company most people know, Rowan faucet company, right? They were running an SAP system for, I think it was about 18 years, and had really not done much with it since the go live. And they were able to, through a 6-month process of really kind of applying those 6 things I mentioned earlier, get their schedule attainment up by 34%, which was a massive for them, because they could actually sell more if they made more. So by getting actually more throughput, they were able to increase revenue, they're increasing EBITDA, etc., and ultimately got their inventory turns up as well by reducing inventories on average. Another fun one is Campbell Soup. Everybody knows soup. One of my favorite things about Campbell Soup is that they love to talk about their seasons, and they have soup season and not soup season. If you dig in it a little bit, you find that soup season is just for the rest of us common people is winter, right? But they have the seasonality thing component to it. They had the same thing. They had some real big targets. They were trying to hit a 5% target in turns improvement. They ultimately ended up with a 39% improvement. They put more than $40 million back into the back pocket. Both these companies did nothing but use the software they had more effectively. They purchased no additional software other than just applying it with the best practices, education, learning, and the capability within the technology. So that's probably the coolest part about these stories. They're all self-funded because obviously with all these benefits, they just pay for themselves. And if you do think of putting this in place first, if you do go to anything more sophisticated from a technological point of view, you're not just accelerating the chaos, you're actually allowing the teams to be successful, right? And I'll leave you with one last one. This is a company out in Pennsylvania, Philadelphia area, Southco. They were actually doing exactly that. They were planning to go to the next version of S4 with the cloud basis, but they were horrendously behind in some of the software updates and stuff, so they decided to actually apply some of the same concepts. So they wanted to be over here on the 4 and 5 range, and after a quick assessment, they realized that they were in the 1 to 2 range, kind of like you guys up here, it sounded like it. And they literally felt like this little duck, right? That on the surface looked like everything was fine. Underneath the surface, people were paddling like crazy, right? And so their journey was about moving from there to the next level 4 and 5. A couple of fundamentals that they applied is one, they never saw it as a project. They assumed it was a continuous improvement transformation that's going to continue to go on for as long as the duration of this initiative. We were on site for less than 5 months. They continued on. And as they continued, they were able to reduce their backlog by 63%, increase service levels, and reduce inventories again, without buying a single piece of technology. So I want to leave you with the notion that there is hope for whatever you've implemented if you apply the right principles to getting there. Okay. Ed, let's pass the mic around, see if there's any particular questions.
There we go.
Okay.
First of all, questions.
Do you have a microphone? Oh, there it is.
I have a question.
Yes.
So you make it sound fairly easy to get people to move from spreadsheets into the system. Is it? Or what's the biggest challenge in doing that?
Yeah, I liken it to taking my kids driving and learning how to drive an automatic, and then you suddenly say, okay, put them in a stick shift car and say you can drive the same thing. It's not the same thing, right? It is definitely hard. I think the biggest challenge is that literally that's their safety blankets. So it's more of a mind shift philosophical challenge, and I think it is a physical one. As soon as you show that you can do probably what the technology, what their spreadsheet does in the technology, there's much more reluctance to let it go. But man, if you just talk about just a complete mind block that you get people to just let it go, it's probably the biggest challenge, I would say. It's not easy, which is typically why we stay around for about 4 or 5 months, because you kind of have to help people usher through that. But thereafter, it's just letting them flourish without them. Yes, sir.
What percentage of being a human is spent just cleaning up massive data?
Yeah, I'll repeat the question. So the question was, is in these kind of engagements, how much of time, percentage time, was made up cleaning up master data, right? Is that correct? So the approach we typically take to address that, because master data is kind of at the heart of everything. Actually, if I go back just to this image here, this is master data, your rules, right? So if you don't get that sorted out, it is a big challenge. But the problem is that, and if you've probably experienced this, if you put a SWAT team together to go clean it up, you'll get it done 6 months into it, but I can promise you in a year it's going to be back to where it was, right? Because you've kind of given it to a handful of people. You haven't changed, you haven't empowered anybody else. So one of the things we use is education to teach the user community to own the master that they're responsible for and hold them accountable to it. And then it becomes a daily, weekly, monthly kind of repetition of like, how do I keep a change? And then there are tools in the technology that will tell you, hey, by the way, your lead times seem off. You want to go look. Or your customer service levels are dropping. Maybe we need to go back and look at master data. Because there's only 2 things happening, right? Either my rules are wrong in the system, or I'm not listening to the system. And I'm doing my own thing, my spreadsheet, right? So if those 2 are alike, then I can automate that all day long. Yeah. So to answer your question more effectively, it's entirely part of the entire initiative of 4 to 5 months. Is teaching them how to use the master data properly. Because we want them to get past the idea of doing transactions and rather be turning the dials, right? And saying, oh, I want to increase safety stock. I just turn the dial up. I don't buy more stuff. Right? Good question. Thank you.
Martin, you mentioned something about managing the exceptions. Can you talk more about that?
Yeah, so most good systems will have something like an alert or an exception management system where when the rules and the behavior don't align, or the dates are misaligned, or the lead times are off, or some quantities are different, it'll alert you. It'll say, hey, your supplier had under-delivered, or your procurement that you wanted to buy, you're overbuying, and there's an alert or an exception. On the manufacturing side, if you're not meeting your plan attainment or your schedule attainment, or dates are off, or you've moved orders, it'll say, hey, there's an exception, there's an alert. So what it's constantly doing is it's trying to proactively communicate to the business, hey, something's off. If you teach the user community to actually think and manage by exception, they become super proactive because they'll start seeing the problem way before it becomes a customer problem. And so if you start listening to those rules or those exceptions along the way that are dependent on those rules and our behaviors, you can actually become incredibly agile, because that actually leads to the agility points about resilience versus agility. When something comes up, I'm able to react pretty fast. I can react to it in 2 ways. I can actually make the adjustment in the system, or I can actually make the actual adjustment, call the supplier and say, hey, you need to expedite this. But I'm doing this way before it becomes a problem. So I don't want to just be resilient. I want to be agile. I want to adjust pretty quickly. Thank you.
So what if it's an exception that I'm seeing, but it's something that's rolling downhill to me? I'm the recipient of this exception, but I didn't control or create it.
So that comes back to the human side of I don't want to change or I want change. And that brings in this notion of cross-collaborating or cross-functional teams. because we talked about silos, right? Silos are spreadsheets, silos are personal information systems. We live in our little worlds. We all have our own metrics by which we determine our performance. A good example is manufacturing's measurement of performance is OEE. We want to run our equipment as efficiently, as effective as possible. Guess what that means? I am making stuff I may not even need just because I want to actually make sure my machines are running. Now, if your goal is inventory savings, those are in conflict with each other. So it's super important to get those KPIs matching. But if, for instance, manufacturing is causing something and I'm on the procurement side receiving that exception, that cross-functional team collaboration, those stand-up meetings daily are as important to be able to address those things collaboratively. Because I may not be able to fix it, but I own the exception. So I may need to call you in to come and fix your part of adjusting it. So the human component, again, we're collaborative, we're an integrated supply chain. Our processes need to be integrated, our data needs to be integrated, and our people need to be integrated. Yeah. Cool.
So I have a question. What's the biggest challenge that you guys face in running and utilizing and leveraging your technology?
9 different We operate on 9 different ERP systems at our company, so we're basically at different levels depending on the product line within the enterprise. So that's our challenge.
Consistency.
Yes.
And do you find that everybody comes to the boardroom with different numbers? Yeah.
Yep.
Right. And that's part of the challenge too, right? So whether it's a spreadsheet or another system, which is why, if you think of it, in each ERP or in each ERP system, you may have different levels, but as an organization, you're here, right? Because you don't have that singular source of truth, that platform. Good call out.
Integrate in any way with any type of blockchain technology that might be able to help companies kind of clean this data so that it's not totally reliant on the human element, so that it can feed in more efficiently into your system.
Yeah, good question. So we don't. So did everybody hear the question? He was asking about how blockchain could help our system with data integrity. We're not selling a system. We don't have a system. We help companies use their systems better. And the systems they run, if it's SAP as an example, may not use blockchain for all of their components. So it all depends. You know, blockchain is obviously a pretty sophisticated component to help you with your ledgering of your data and be able to give you data accuracy. But at the end of the day, transactions that are running through the system that are human dependent are still human prone error, right? Blockchain is super good with technological data movement that actually doesn't require human intervention. Assuming the human touches it, it's prone to error. And that's one of the challenges we have to teach companies. How do you actually learn how to create that discipline and governance so that you don't end up having that data leakage, as we said. Yeah. Well, thank you, guys. I appreciate you guys sitting through this. This was fun chatting to you guys. Yeah. Thank you.